Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. From a purely biological standpoint, human beings are literally hardwired to seek out safety. We want the predictable commute, the reliable 9 to 5, basically a life where our brains don't have to burn extra calories constantly panicking about survival. But today, we're unpacking a totally different mindset. We're looking at the people who actively run away from that safety, sprinting straight toward the chaotic edges of human experience.
So I want you to imagine your comfortable, predictable daily routine as a safe house. You've got sturdy walls, a solid roof, and it keeps all the storms out. It's your ultimate sanctuary, right? But what kind of psychological framework looks at that exact same cozy house and instead of feeling comforted, feels like they're suffocating inside a cage?
Well, to answer that, we're going to lean on this incredibly dense, powerful 43-word source text. Think of this as our literal roadmap for today. Now, at first glance, it might just look like some poetic job description for frontline policing or emergency work. But as we break this foundational axiom down piece by piece, you're going to see how it completely dismantles pretty much every cinematic stereotype we have about these roles.
Let's start with the very first contradiction. Section 1, escaping the predictable.
The quote opens up by stating, "We share an abhorrence of the predictable." And what's fascinating here is how the predictive processing framework explains this. Our brains are basically prediction engines, and for most of us, being an autopilot feels really comfortable. But this is a literal biological rebellion. For this specific psychological profile, living in the safe statistical center of the bell curve feels like a slow death. They naturally gravitate outward, toward the volatile edges.
But then the text immediately clarifies, but we are not danger lovers. And that's absolutely crucial. Think of the difference between a storm chaser and someone playing Russian roulette. The person playing Russian roulette, they want the thrill of potential destruction. The danger is the whole point. But the storm chaser, they actively want to survive. They don't want their truck flipped over. They're just navigating an extreme hazard to escape the mundane valley below.
And that brilliantly dismantles the whole danger lover myth we see in movies. It replaces that reckless, thrill-seeking idea with the experience seeker reality. The hazard itself isn't the goal. The hazard is simply a toll booth. It's a steep price that has to be paid for proximity to the edge. They aren't chasing danger. They're just paying the toll to get away from the mundane. So if they aren't running toward danger, what on earth are they running toward? Section 2, seeking the unspeakable.
We are seekers. I love that. That single word completely reframes the entire experience. It's not about being some rigid enforcer of order. It's practically an anthropological quest. They're seeking to witness the human animal when all the polite, everyday societal filters are completely stripped away. They want to see the absolute totality of human capability, from the highest peaks of compassion down to the terrifying voids of cruelty.
And as we map out this descent, you can see the architecture of the human fringe. It starts at the awesome, which actually implies profound dread and reverence, and steps down into the incredible, which refers to things that actively fracture our established logic. But then we hit the absolute bottom floor, the unspeakable.
And the unspeakable isn't just a dramatic adjective here. It's a literal neurological reality. When a human being witnesses an event of profound chaos or tragedy, the brain's amygdala hijacks the whole system for survival. In that process, Broca's area, the part of the brain responsible for speech, literally powers down. It's a mechanical failure. The vocabulary for what they're witnessing simply ceases to exist. Language just evaporates.
Okay, so what happens when you constantly expose your mind to environments where language completely fails? Section 3, abandoning the need for meaning.
The text continues, never mind if we can interpret, and wow, the cognitive dissonance here is immense. See, human brains are narrative-making machines. We rely heavily on the just world hypothesis, that comforting idea that bad things happen for a logical reason. We desperately want to assign a why to the chaos. But out of the unspeakable edges of humanity, the math simply doesn't work. There is no why. This means they have to do a deliberate cognitive bypass. If they constantly try to force a logical narrative onto a completely illogical tragedy, it'll literally drive them mad. So they must practice this agonizing, protective surrender. They literally have to abandon the luxury of making sense of the world just to survive it. But of course, that protective surrender comes at a tremendous cost. Section 4, absorbing the psychological hazard. The author writes, or if it is hazardous to the soul. That is such a heavy, brutal admission. Proximity to the unspeakable requires an upfront agreement to absorb damage. The real hazard here isn't a broken arm or a physical injury. It's a fundamental threat to the observer's inner life and their core identity.
In psychological terms, we call this moral injury. And it's distinctly different from fear-based PTSD, where the brain is just stuck in a biological survival loop. Moral injury is a permanent stain on your worldview. It's the slow and visible erosion of your baseline empathy, your ability to trust, and your fundamental belief in the rules of society, mostly because you're repeatedly seeing those rules shattered. The sources use a fantastic analogy to explain this. It's like staring directly at a total solar eclipse. You know for a fact the invisible radiation is physically burning your retinas, right? But the sheer cosmic rarity of the spectacle compels you to keep your eyes open. The damage is a direct, unavoidable result of the witnessing. You accept the burn just to see the anomaly.
So despite the cognitive bypass, the moral injury, and the burned retinas, we finally arrive at the ultimate justification. Section 5, the ultimatum of presence.
You can really see how these pillars perfectly converge. You abandon the predictable center, you bypass the need for interpretation, and you absorb the hazard to the soul. These three pillars support the core architecture of radical witnessing. Society generally prefers to keep its eyes shut, which means we require these designated witnesses to go stand on the edge on our behalf.
And that brings us to the final definitive imperative. To be there is the thing. Mere presence completely overrides the hero complex. It's not about fixing the unfixable or forcing order upon chaos. It's a primal, almost sacred duty. When the absolute worst of human nature reveals itself, someone must stand in the room. They're simply there to ensure the abyss doesn't go unwitnessed.
Let's look at that fully decoded quote one more time, now that we have all the context. We share an abhorrence of the predictable, but we are not danger lovers. We are seekers of the awesome, the incredible, the unspeakable. Never mind if we can interpret or if it is hazardous to the soul. To be there is the thing. It is a profoundly different philosophical reframing of the frontline experience, isn't it? But what you should really take away from this is the hidden aftermath. The quietest, yet arguably hardest part of this entire experience is the jarring return to the mundane. I mean, think about the profound psychological friction of clocking out, taking off the uniform, sitting down at a polite dinner table, and trying to shrink that massive, altered worldview back down to fit into a normal conversation about the weather. It's staggering. So, to quickly summarize our deep dive into radical witnessing, this mindset is driven by a biological rejection of routine. It actively seeks the extreme fringes of human experience. It requires bypassing the need for logical interpretation just to survive. It fully accepts moral injury as the cost of admission. And ultimately, it serves to provide absolute raw presence on behalf of a society that mostly wants to look away. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. If standing on the edge of the light is fundamentally hazardous to the soul, does the continuous act of witnessing eventually hollow the observer out entirely? Or, through all that fire and cognitive dissonance, does the act of pure presence actually transform them into something beyond the normal human experience? Think about where you draw the line between your own predictable safety and the hidden toll paid by those standing in the storm. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.